Okay, in the first video, we went through how to create a data table for your data in Microsoft Excel. What we're going to do here is we're going to continue with that and look at how we then take that data and actually turn it into a graph. So we're going back to this hypothetical situation where we have a Nerf gun firing a dart at various launch velocities and we're measuring the distance traveled. And we're going to make a graph of that. If you're unsure of how to get this table looking like this, you can watch the previous video on creating that table. So I want to take launch velocity. I want to graph that on my x-axis because that's my independent variable, the thing that I was actually changing. And on my y-axis, I want to graph the average distance traveled. Okay, it's important that when you have multiple trials of something, you graph the average. You don't want to graph each individual trial. We're just going to graph the average of those two trials. All right. So in order to do that, I'm going to first take what I want to be graphed on my x-axis, which are these 5 numbers, and I'm going to highlight them. Okay. And then I'm going to hit the control button, and I'm going to highlight the numbers that I want on my y-axis. It's important that you do it in that order. You highlight the x and then the y. I also usually set up my table with the x in the far left column and then what's going to be on the y-axis in the columns to the right. So I have my data now highlighted that I want to graph, and then I'm going to go up to Insert, okay, and I'm going to insert a chart here. So we have all these different options. You want to look for the icon that looks like this, all right? It's just the 2 axes with a bunch of colored dots. That's a scatter plot. Depending on your version, it might look slightly different, but I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to select this top left one, which is a scatter plot with no line, okay, markers only. So I'm going to click on that, and my graph now appears. So we now have a graph of this data, okay, but we're going to do a few formatting things to it. All right, and there's a few ways of doing this. The easiest way is probably going up to this top left corner here and do adding chart element. You also can click the plus sign, but I like the top left corner, to be honest with you. So we're going to add axes titles, okay, on the horizontal axis, and we're also going to add an axes title on the vertical axis. We already have our chart title, so I'm going to go ahead and type in here in the axes title what the 2 quantities are. So this x value was the launch velocity, and that was measured in meters per second, just like what we did with our table. We're going to put the quantity and then the units in parentheses. The y-axis is going to be distance traveled, and that's measured in meters. We're going to change the title here. The standard format for the title is always y versus x. So the title of this chart is going to be distance traveled versus launch velocity. All right. And sometimes we might add to that title, but that is the standard form of the y variable versus the x variable. Okay. Once we have that, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add a trend line here. So I can do that from adding the chart elements location, or I can right click on one of the dots and do add trend line there. All right. You'll have all these different options, all right, whether you want exponential, linear, logarithmic. This one looks pretty linear. We do have a way of cheating though, okay, and that is we go down here, and you want to do this anyway, but you're going to go down here and check the box for display equation and display r-squared value. So now we have an equation of this line calculated by Excel along with this r-squared value, and this is the key one because this tells us how closely the line matches the data. So we could, if I click back on my trend line, we could change the type from exponential to linear to logarithmic to polynomial, and we're getting all these different r-squared values. The closer it is to 1, the better. So the linear one's at almost 0.95, the logarithmic one's 0.92, exponential's 0.94. So of those 3, linear is the best. I could click on the polynomial one, but we really never are going to use that fit. That's a long story that I'm not going to get into right now. It's really going to be one of these 3 or the power graph. Okay. But this looks like it's linear, and sometimes you might need a little bit more data to tell, but I'm going to say this is a linear graph, so I'm going to leave it as a linear fit. Once we're at that point, we have all the things that we need. Okay, we have a complete graph here. You can change some formatting things, like if you don't like the size of this font, you can click on that axis and make those slightly bigger. All right. Same thing over here. Maybe it's just a little bit tough to read, and you'll see that Excel will resize it for you. You can expand your graph. Sometimes that helps to make it look a little bit neater. Change all these titles simply by clicking on them, and we can make them bigger. We can bold them. If we want to change the color, I wouldn't do red, but you could do lots of those little stylistic things that don't necessarily make it more correct, but they do make it look nicer. And that is important with these graphs. You do want it to look nice because you're trying to present the data here in a clear, logical manner. You're trying to make it look good for the reader. So I'm going to leave it like that now. I think it's a little bit easier to read with the bigger font. I like the title bolded, but part of that is your personal preference. Once we have our graph all done, we can click on it. We can either do Control C or right click and do copy. And I can go over here to my lab report, find the spot where I want to insert it into my lab report, and then either hit paste or Control V. And now I have my graph in my lab report. And if I want to make it a little bit smaller, I can do that. And I could change the font in here as well. The fact that we copied it from Microsoft Excel means that we can change around a lot of things in the actual report itself.